I was remembering this evening as I was talking with Ray that when my daughter was pregnant with Jeremiah and she was being told that he wasn't going to live and all of these things that medicine was telling her, thank God she didn't listen, and thank God God brought her out of that completely through that experience. But I remember when she called me and she was panicking and she was saying, Jeremiah hasn't moved for an hour. Mom, he's not moving. I'm doing everything for him to move. He's not moving. And she was hysterical. And I got in my car and I was driving to her house, probably faster than the speed limit. And I was listening to these two songs that Connie had sent me. One was I'll Praise You in This Storm, and the other one was We Will Not Bow Down to the Idols of Man. And I was sobbing, like from my innermost being, just crying out to him, singing these songs, and I was shouting from the top of my lungs, you're the one who led the Israelites out of Egypt. You're the one who formed the earth and the heavens. You're the one. And I just kept reminding myself of who he is and the name that he established for himself. That name that he wants us to remember. That's so easy for us to forget when we're going through something. It's so easy for us to forget what he's taken us out of. It's so easy for us to forget the name that he has made for himself, both in the word and in our lives. The bondage that he has brought us out of, the eyes he's given us to see. We act like we've had that, like we've had it this whole time. He hasn't done any of that, right? We gave ourselves the eyes to see. Couldn't do it all our lives, but, suddenly we were able to do that for ourselves. So I'm going through something right now. Some of you know a little bit about it, and Ray's going through something too. So we talked this evening about what God's been showing him and what he's been showing me. And one of the things that we both related on is that he hasn't been saying, like, this is what I'm going to do about this situation, right? Like, and of course, that's what our flesh wants to hear. Here's the itinerary, here's the plan, as though God consults with us. But that's not what he hasn't been cooperating with that. But what he has been doing is he's been reminding Ray, this is what I did, and I did this, and remember when I revealed this, and I've testified to this, and remember when you were like this. And he's been doing the same thing with me. Look at the wisdom that you now have. Look at the lack of sense that you had the majority of your life. But look what I've made you understand now. Look where I brought you. Look what I brought you out of. And he just keeps showing me, like demonstrating for me, I revealed my glory in this situation. I've revealed my glory in that situation. And I will reveal my glory in this situation. So Ray and I were talking tonight about what he's been reading in the Word, and he shared with me that he's been reading the book of Exodus. And he was telling me that one of the things that the Lord says over and over is, I'm the Lord. Remember when I did this. Remember when I did this. Remember the name that I made for myself. And then he tests them to see if they're going to remember. And they keep grumbling. They keep grumbling. They're like going through the wilderness and they're like, you brought us out here to starve. Back home, the good old days when we were sitting around pots of meat, never mind that we were in bondage and being beat and killed, but we sat around pots of meat then, and you've brought us out here to starve and thirst to death. So God gives them manna and quail and water from a rock. And then the next test comes. Moses goes up the mountain and he's taking too long. So they start melting down their jewelry and making a golden calf. And so Ray and I were talking about this and we're like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do? What other choice do we have? What are we going to melt down our jewelry and make a calf? We have to trust what God is doing right now. We have to know if we believe we've placed our hope in this God who we're going to meet up in the sky. We're going to be caught up with him in the air. We believe that, but we don't believe that he conforms all things for the good of those who love him and trust him and obey him and endure in his name. There's no example in Scripture of God forsaking his people who believe in him. Not one. I know what I've done. I know that I've obeyed every single thing he told me to do, that I waited on him, that I didn't step ahead of him. I know what I've done. God is my witness of what I've done. So I'm going to do the same thing that I was doing when I was hanging on while Tori was pregnant with Jeremiah. And I'm going to go to the Word, and I'm going to encourage myself with the Word, and I'm going to take you with me just like I did then. Because no matter what you're going through, we need to remember what God has done. We need to remember what He's done in the Word and what He's done in our lives. And that's what He's teaching me right now, is you need to stand in who I am. You need to endure in who you say you believe in. And stop leaning on your own understanding and the results that you want, because I'll give those results when you finally get to that place of learning what I'm teaching you right now. I know that to be true. He taught me that from the very beginning in 2019 when He drew me to Himself. It's something that He has told me over and over and over. Don't talk to me about timelines. I don't work on timelines. I work on when you learn the lesson and when my will is accomplished. So if I want to greatly reduce my suffering, then I just need to break into the position sooner than later. Exodus 11. Now the Lord had said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from there, and when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. So Moses said, this is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the female slave, who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But among the Israelites not a dog will bark at a person or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Ooh, that's a strong, powerful statement. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me, and saying, go, you and all the people who follow you. After that I will leave. Then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his country. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old lambs males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some of it is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and with your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and will strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. Okay? No hand sanitizer, no gloves, no goggles, no mask. You know what I mean? He knows how to distinguish between what? Between Egypt and Israel. This is a day you are to commemorate for the generations to come. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, remove the yeast from your houses, for whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the 7th must be cut off from Israel. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the 7th day. Do no work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month you are to eat bread made without yeast, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast is to be cut off in it, must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast. Wherever you live, you must eat unleavened bread. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood of the basin, and put some of the blood on the top and on both sides of the door frame. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the door frame and will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your house and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised, observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, What does this ceremony mean to you? Tell them it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. Let me ask you something. This is what people are calling Easter. Is this what you're saying? Is this what you understand of Easter? No, you don't understand Passover when you're celebrating Easter. Tell them it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. So what are you to say to your children when they ask you, why do you celebrate this? You're supposed to remember what he did for the Israelites. You're supposed to remember, and you're supposed to rend your heart to this. And I'm going to tell you something else. The reason why when I'm going through something, I go to this, I go to the word, is because I observe these festivals. I know what they are. I know what they mean, because out of obedience comes wisdom and understanding. I believe in that name that God made for himself. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, Up, leave my people. You and the Israelites go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also bless me. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them whatever they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. So when you eat unleavened bread, that's what you want. You want to remember that. When you're observing the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days, which is part of the Passover, that's what you want to remember. Now, the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was about 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very last day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, These are the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat it. Any slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. You understand what we're talking about here, right? The Passover meal. Jesus is the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat it. Anyone who is not circumcised cannot partake in Jesus, in the offering of Christ. They will not partake in that. They must be circumcised in heart. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside of the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his house circumcised, in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies to both the native-born and to the foreigner residing among you. Guess what? No favoritism. Same law for both. All the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, and on that very day the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. Then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today in the month of Aviv you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, and on the seventh day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead. Ooh, what's that sound like, guys? Many of you understand that sounds like the mark of the beast. Do you also understand that it sounds like the seal of God? Because both are coming out of your right hand and your forehead. But where do they originate? In your heart. On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. What does that mean? This law of the Lord is to be on your lips, that what the Lord has commanded. Now, in this time, law is written where? On stones, right? A little later. Law hasn't even actually been given yet. But if the law is written on the tablets of your heart and mind, then that better be coming out of your mouth. If what you have in your heart is the Spirit of God, then that better be coming out of your right hand, your deeds, your forehead, the way you think, and the way you speak. But it all comes from your heart. The mark of the beast is not going to come from outside because nothing from outside defiles you. It's what's in your heart. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time year after year. So he keeps reminding, for the Lord did this. I am the Lord your God. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he promised on oath to your ancestors, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of a cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Again, I just want to point out, so that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." By the way, is God talking about delivering a spirit out? No. He's using deliverance in a totally different context, isn't he? He never, ever, ever in the word refers to delivering out a spirit. He refers to it as casting out a spirit. So you are not to use that. Deliverance is when he's delivering you out of bondage, you out of this world, a baby out of the womb. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. See, these are reminders for us, and it's a reminder for me. The Lord will fight for me. I need only to be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." So here's part of what Ray and I were talking about tonight, is that we were talking about, like, we read this story and we know the end game, right? But we oftentimes, like, I am definitely guilty of this. I think, oh, they're so foolish. Why do they keep grumbling against Moses? Why do they keep, after everything that God did for them, why are they grumbling? Why are they, complaining and wanting to turn back? Why are they, oh, those wicked Israelites, right? But that's also what we do. Like, when we go through stuff, we start minimizing what God has done. We take it for granted, or we think like, oh no, maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it wasn't that bad when I was in bondage, or yeah, but is he going to help me now? Is he going to be the God that he says he is? And we lose faith. We lose heart. But see, it's not enough. Like, this is something that I've been saying to you guys, is it isn't enough for me to say, well, the time's going to pass. I'll just wait. I'll white knuckle it. He's going to show up. He's going to show up. No, there's something that the Lord is doing with me right now in bringing me low, in bringing me up to the wall. He requires something of me right now. He requires exactly what I'm doing right now with you. He requires me to stand in faith, stand on the word, stand on the promises that he's made in his word, and to remind myself of who he is, what he's done. It's not okay for me to just keep asking him to build that name. Keep showing me who you are. Keep giving me a sign. That's not okay. It's not okay for me to do, and it's not okay for you to do. There are going to come times in your faith walk, and more as the day approaches, more and more, you will be required to put your faith where your mouth is. And you know how I know that? Because Jesus says of that 45 days, during that great tribulation that many of you are going to come out of, he says, if those days hadn't been shortened, that no one would have survived. And we know that God's people are not going to survive in the physical. He's talking about the spiritual. They would not have been able to endure because they would have lost heart. And I'm looking at my situation right now and I'm thinking, thank God I'm not going to be here, first of all. But just because I'm not going to be here during that time doesn't mean he doesn't require me to endure the same. Does not mean that he doesn't require me to remind myself of the things that he's done. And that when he's reminding me and he's saying, look at the wisdom you have, Carrie Ann. Look at the things that you understand. Who has this understanding? Do you know anyone who has this understanding? Who else am I speaking these things to? I don't know a single person. I know that in the assembly, that when we come together to discern something, that God discerns the same thing in each person in a different way. I see that glory. I see what he does. But in terms of the role that God has set me apart to fill at this point in history, I don't know anyone doing this. I don't know anyone speaking it. I don't know anyone understanding it until he testifies to the things I'm saying. The things that don't come from my wisdom, that's for sure. The things that he has revealed to me. So he keeps affirming and reaffirming the role that he has me in, the things that he has done in me, and I am responsible for reminding myself of that. And guess what? God also put his people responsible for remembering that, and he established a holy day to remind us every single year of what he's done. And most of us can't be bothered to do it. We're out there celebrating Easter and having an Easter egg hunt with a bunny. And we claim we're doing it in the name of Christ, right? We're celebrating Christ. Yeah, well, that isn't the way that Christians celebrate, nor is it the way that he has told us to celebrate. It's a lie. That's a lie. And someone recently said to me when I confronted them about that, my childhood bishop said, who cares what we call it? Who cares what we call it? Wow. I mean, God does. He cares, or he wouldn't have established it in the way that he established it. He wouldn't have called it Passover. But I guess man knows better than God. I mean, come on. Who cares what we call it? That's disgusting. Verse 19, then the angel of God who had been traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Oh, if we only had the knowledge that these pagans had, right? If we only had that wisdom and that perspective that the Lord is doing this. Because surely we would explain this away by science. Surely we would explain it away by some natural phenomenon that caused the Israelites to be set free, right? And the Egyptians to be snuffed out like a wick. No, it's not God. It was global warming. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. No, that was low tide, guys. That was low tide, right? That's how we end up thinking about these things. Like in the moment, we're like, whoa, wow. Oh, you know what? As time goes on, right? As time goes on, oh, it was just low tide. We diminish the miracles of God. We convince ourselves right out of God being real. So what I'm saying to you right now is we need to convince ourselves back into the reality of who God is. We need to stand in that, and we need to keep affirming ourselves until he comes through yet again. We need to keep reminding ourselves of what he's done, because we are required to stand. And how can we stand if we keep doing this? If we keep saying, oh, no, maybe it wasn't him. Maybe he isn't real. It's very clear to us when we're reading about somebody else's story, when we're reading about it in the Bible. But when we remember it in our own lives, we diminish it. We act like what was a miracle that God performed in our lives. Maybe it wasn't that big. I mean, Jeremiah was going to come at some time, right? No, we were told Jeremiah was going to die. That's what we were told. And that baby's in the 98th percentile right now. In terms of his height, he is a strong, happy boy. Healthy, happy. His developmental milestones are ahead. He's already pulling himself up. At a little over 6 months, he's said his first 2 words. God has defied everything that those false gods tried to say. And both mom and baby recovered faster than I've ever seen anyone recover. Faster than anyone else we know who's given birth this year. How does that happen? Faster than anyone who used those false gods. Why? Because of the glory of God, because he wants us to know that he is the Lord. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore, And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. That's what God wants, for us to put our trust in him, to know that he is God, to remind ourselves that he is God. As a matter of fact, to remind ourselves every single year of what he did on Passover. And thank God that he has performed miracles in our individual lives, in us as a community, as a house, as a church, as a temple, and throughout the Bible to encourage us. And you remember that these things were done as an example to us. That's what Paul says. These things were done as an example to us. And the other thing that I always want to remember is what happened to the people who turned back. What happened to the people who rebelled? They died in the wilderness. And we've been told that. What happened to Lot's wife who turned back? She too perished, turned into a pillar of salt. And what happens when we put our hand to the plow and we look back? You know, this was one of the things that I was contemplating today. Okay, so if he doesn't come through with this, like, I can't go back to psychology. How could I go back? There's nowhere to go back to. You know, and then my head popped out of wherever it was, because God has not brought me to this point for me to be concerned about these things. He has a plan. He has a plan. And what he's doing with me right now is requiring me to trust in that plan, to wait on him and to trust him and to remind me of who he's been. His glory is going to be revealed.